Alright, in early 2026 I decided to do a little bit of nostalgic recreation. When I was a kid, my father had some pressed steel airplanes and other toys like trucks and so on that he kept at his parents' house, and when we go to visit the grandparents I got to play with them. And then at some point they disappeared. I don't know what happened. And I always liked those. They always were very high quality. They were realistic enough to impress a little kid, and very durable, and likely to last through generations. And I think they were quite inexpensive too. People could afford these things for their kids. So I have acquired these 4 examples. They're all from the same company, which is one of the well-known companies that made this type of thing in between World War I and World War II. So the purpose of this video is just to share a little bit what I've learned about these, and just to show them, and also as an appeal to other people who have more knowledge about this than myself to chime in with extra information. I'd like to learn more about them, so hopefully this video will take care of both of those purposes. Here's just a little bit from the Wikipedia article. These are all made by a company called Wyandotte, which is spelled W-Y-A-N-D-O-T-T-E, and that's the name of a suburb essentially of Detroit. And that's where the factory was that made these. They also made other kinds of toys, and they weren't all pressed steel types, but they were certainly well known for their pressed steel toys of various kinds. And they certainly made airplanes, fanciful ones and ones that were supposed to resemble real airplanes. The actual company name was All Metal Products Company. It was founded in 1920 and based in Wyandotte, Michigan for most of its history. It produced inexpensive pressed steel metal toys under the Wyandotte brand name, and was the largest manufacturer of toy guns in the U.S. for several decades in the 20th century. The company's slogan was, "Wyandotte toys are good and safe." To keep costs down, the company used scrap and surplus raw materials whenever possible, often manufacturing their toys from scrap metal obtained from the local auto factories in the Detroit area. Initially, All Metal Products Company specialized in toy guns, including pop guns, water pistols, and air rifles. Their slogan in the 1920s was, "Every boy wants a pop gun." By 1927, they'd become the world's largest manufacturer of toy guns. They stopped producing air rifles in 1929, but continued to dominate the toy gun market through other types of guns, cap guns and so on, and also plastic pistols. Their metal toys, along with the metal toys of every manufacturer in the U.S., were banned essentially during World War II because the metal was needed for the war effort. The company survived by producing wooden toys and also die-cut cardboard, build-your-own play sets during the war. During the war, All Metal Products also manufactured clips for various types of military rifles, especially, according to Wikipedia, the M1 Garand rifle. In 1948, die-cast and plastic toys were added to the Wyandotte line, allowing it to compete with other companies who sold inexpensive dime store type toys at lower prices than Wyandotte produced pressed metal toys. In the early 1950s, they moved to a site in Ohio, hoping that closer proximity to Ohio's steel mills and cheaper Ohio labor would help the company cut costs. They went bankrupt in 1956. And then some of their remaining product line was sold to the Lewis Marks Company. A news reporter by the name of Wallace Hayden published an article in 2008 in the News Herald, which was a Detroit area newspaper, and I'm just going to quote a couple of things from his article. A hulking press chomps down on sheet metal with a kerchunk sound, sending the thudding vibration through the floor. A newly fashioned metal part falls into the basket as the operator slaps another sheet onto the grease-coated die. The process is repeated a couple thousand times each shift. This sounds like a typical 20th century stamping plant, perhaps punching out auto parts. However, this particular scene unfolded in what was sometimes called Santa's Downriver Workshop. From 1921 to 1957, the all-metal products company, better known as Wyandotte Toys, turned out millions of toys that sold around the world. Anyone over age 50 might remember playing with one from their childhood. So this is the first one I acquired. All of these came from eBay sellers. This is, as far as I can tell, known as the Wyandotte Airliner. And it might have been a model number MX119. However, I think that's just what collectors refer to it as because of the MX119 on the wing. Other sources say that these all had, for example, 3-letter or 3-digit names or model numbers. So I'm thinking that's just an unofficial designator. Some sources say this was supposed to resemble a DC-3, which would have been popular at the time in the years leading up to World War II. The propellers on these spin even though they're just stamped out of sheet metal. As far as I can tell, these were just made with flat blades. Although I have a couple where I'm wondering if prior owners didn't put pliers on these and twist them to approximate the pitch of a wooden or metal airplane propeller. So I don't know if they came from the factory that way or not. I've actually straightened all mine out because most of them were just bent over and everything. I've straightened them out to what I assume was the factory produced condition. These typically don't have bottoms on them, so they're stamped so you have a top profile but no detailing on the bottom. It has the 2 engines and 2 wheels. These are wooden wheels. These are probably somewhere between 1/2 inch and 5/8 of an inch, and they're on little metal axles that are just crushed at the ends so they don't slip through the holes. Instead of a tail wheel, there is this tail skid. I haven't found any pictures that show a wheel for this. And actually, I think if it had a wheel on it, it would rest too much tail up. So I suspect it's just supposed to be a skid, and maybe the hole is there to make it resemble a wheel, at least to a child's eye. Anybody who knows better, please let me know. This plane here is supposedly called the United Super Airliner, although some references just called it Airliner. I think it's called Super Airliner because it says Super on the side decal. Here it says Super Mainliner, but all the books on antique toys I found did not mention Mainliner. They just said Super Airliner or United Super Airliner, and indeed there's a United logo there on the nose, and both sides have that same thing. It's probably supposed to resemble any of the 4-engine cargo planes that came around during World War II, so this one may have been produced late in the 40s when they got back into making these toys after the prohibition on doing so during the war. This would have resembled a DC-4 probably, even though DC-4s typically didn't have 2 rows of windows. Things like the doors are just stampings without actually being holes, but the fact that they're pushed in makes them look a little bit more realistic, again, to a kid's eyes for sure. It's painted in a teal color, which apparently is typical. And the wing is some sort of plated steel. And the propellers are identical to the other airplane I showed, just being flat sheet metal stampings. This has a tri-tail on it, which the Douglas airplanes did not have. At least not ones that would have been like this. You know, you would have had a Constellation that would have had a tri-tail, but that came a bit later. So maybe not intended to represent an exact airplane, but I think it represents the popular DC series from Douglas, in spite of the cool looking tail. Now, here's a conundrum I have, and I've not been able to sort it out, so again, I hope some viewers might be able to help me with it. When I got this, it was configured to sit back like this, like a tail dragger. The landing gear tabs on the bottom are easily bendable the way that they're formed, so that they can be bent like this, or they can be pushed forwards or backwards, you know, a fraction of an inch. And with them in that position, the airplane would tend to sit like this. And if you don't have a nose wheel on it, then again it's got kind of that DC-3 look, although in a 4-engine version. Offhand, I can't think of any 4-engine American airplanes that were tail draggers, but they may have sold it that way, they may have intended it that way. And certainly these extensions on the outer panels of the T-tail or the tri-tail would serve as something to set the rear end down on, so it doesn't, you know, sit too far back. That's the only reason I can see for having those go down so far, is to be something that the rear end could sit on. But then I found pictures of what apparently is the same model with a nose wheel on it and sitting horizontally like this. To get it to sit that way, you need the extra weight of the nose landing gear and its wheel, and the rear wheels apparently needed to be pushed a bit rearwards so that the center of gravity is appropriate to make it sit down on its nose. There are in fact metal tabs coming down from the fuselage, which would have gone to something, but I'm not sure. So what I've done here is I've recreated the nose landing gear off of the photos I've seen, and it seems like I'm pretty close to what the original was like in terms of dimensions and shape. I've seen pictures where everything is very rusty, and I've seen ones where this nose landing gear, the metal part, has got the same teal color as the fuselage. I was hoping to do that when I fabricated this sheet metal part, but I couldn't find a matching paint. So instead I painted it with a metallic silver color that I'd hoped would resemble the landing gear tabs that come off of the wing. Of course, I couldn't get it that shiny. I did try to distress the paint a little bit so it didn't look too pristine. And then the pictures I saw were all like this, so I couldn't tell you know, what was done with the width of the landing gear bracket and the width of the wheel. So I just spaced them out on mine so that it doesn't rattle around too loosely there. But I think it very closely resembles the other pictures I've seen. So, was this model produced in two versions? One intended to be a tail dragger, the other intended to be a tricycle gear plane? And why is the tail this tall if it wasn't a tail dragger in one configuration? And if it's not supposed to have a nose gear, then what are those tabs for? They don't seem like they'd go to anything else. Anyway, so I think it's kind of a cool looking airplane. I think this is almost my favorite one of the four I have. This model here is supposedly called the China Clipper, and I've seen a model number of 207 associated with this design. The time frame for its manufacture is supposedly the late 1930s into the early 1940s, pre-World War II for sure. According to all sources I've been able to find online, and a couple of books the library got for me, this China Clipper was always supposed to have a single vertical stabilizer tail standing up from the fuselage like this. You know, the better to keep it out of the spray and stuff, I suppose. It unusually for Wyandotte has a bottom panel. It's not an open bottom on the fuselage, and I guess that's because with that particular boat hull shape, if it didn't have a panel there, it would really look like something was missing, especially from angles like this. You need it to resemble a flying boat more, so it needs a bottom panel. Extensions on that make the sponsons sticking out here on the sides, but they're punched out to form tabs for the landing gear, which most of these big flying boats had provisions for beaching gear so they could be rolled up on land. I don't think any of them could actually land on those wheels, but it's certainly equipped with them here. So I just have to say, well, those are the beaching wheels. The engine details are exactly the same as the other ones. The props turn very nicely on these. The wing sits up kind of high, almost like some of the smaller amphibious airplanes. But the fuselage shape resembles something like a Martin or a Boeing 314, and certainly the sponsons are something like the 314 had. So again, it's probably not supposed to be any particular original type of flying boat, but to me the resemblance is closest to the 314, except the 314 had a triple tail. So there's a bit of a mystery there. This is marked China Clipper on the side, Wyandotte Toys, and PAA for the carrier. It also has a tail wheel in a position that makes it practical as a toy, but not anything the original airplane would have had in that position. This is the original paint on here, and of the ones I have, this by far has the best quality paint. I don't think it's been repainted. The paint does seem to be pretty old, so I think that's the original paint throughout. Although, you know, who knows. And certainly it has decals on it, which I'm presuming are original. So I think that is the original paint. Anybody who knows better, let me know. Last but not least is another flying boat. The fuselage design appears to be identical to the other one, and the wing appears to be identical, as do the engines. But there are some differences. For example, this one apparently was not intended to have a bottom panel on it. And I say that because on this one, which does have a bottom panel and clearly is supposed to, the tabs for the landing gear are folded out of the sponsons, which are in turn part of the bottom panel of the fuselage. But that is secured with these dual tab foldovers here. And on this plane, there's just this simple bracket, but it uses the same tabs from the main fuselage to hold it in place. So if this is just one of those with the bottom fuselage missing from the factory, then it wouldn't have this piece, I don't think. And I do believe this is original. Now this plane had a similar color, a very light blue color, and the wing was this color, but it was to the point when I received it like somebody had left it sitting in a bucket of salty water for a bunch of years. It was heavily corroded with a big thick layer of rust on it. I got it dirt cheap, probably because of its appearance. And I had a machine shop I use go over it with a sandblaster after I'd taken it all apart, of course. This one also did not have any wheels on it when I received it. So I thought, okay, this is just a cheaper version of that one, maybe. And it doesn't have a tail wheel like this one does. There's nothing to mount it to, but there are these tabs on the back of the fuselage which act as skids for the rear. This plane doesn't even have that on the fuselage, so even though the fuselage is the same shape between the two of them, there's a significant difference between the stamping for this and the stamping for this. They aren't exactly the same. Now this one also has a tri-tail, making it look more like the Boeing 314. And one would think that would be a deluxe feature, but everything else points to this being a less expensive toy than that one. So what I had to do with this one is it was so heavily pitted after the sandblasting it removed all the rust. I went over it with filler of the kind you might use on a car body that was pitted, and built it up, application, sanded down, application, sanded down, and I got it looking pretty good. There's not that many places where it shows. Mostly it's pretty good. There's occasionally a little imperfection. I did leave some of the pitting on the rear of the horizontal stabilizer here. It was very hard to sand it with these other panels in the way. And granted, I did do it when it was off the plane. I did a better job on the bottom. It was just easier to sand. And used the closest color matches I could get from the hardware store. So I'm interested to know from anybody who's an expert on these the story of these two different types. I'm presuming these are the original tail, not something taken off a different model and stuck on here. I'm presuming this is original. Anyway, that's all I have to say about these, and I would again welcome any additional information anybody out there might have to offer in the comments.